superficial and glamorous. But I think it is the mirror of the world.
They are Hollywood's golden faces, but they once used real slaps, vile insults, and the power of their hands to crush a woman. I am Jacqueline Bisset, the English muse, the intellectual Marilyn of the 70s, the most elegant sex symbol ever to grace the silver screen. I once set the world ablaze with my blue eyes in Bullitt, with the legendary white shirt in the deep, with absolute sophistication in day for night. But at 81, I've become the new storm sweeping through Hollywood. A blacklist, the 5 people I hate most. The names on that list have shaken all of Hollywood. Some were former lovers. Some were directors, moguls, co-stars. They once toasted with me on the red carpet. But behind the camera, what did they do? And why did I decide to speak out after decades of silence? Join me in uncovering this blacklist and the reasons behind each name. The deeper you go into this video, the more rotten and decayed this Hollywood will appear.
Well, you might be closer than you think.
Jacqueline Bisset, the English rose, the flame behind the scars. I was born on September 13, 1944, in the midst of World War II, as bombs echoed through the skies of England. A baby girl came into the world in Surrey, with cold blue eyes, but from the very beginning, her life was marked by tragedy. My father collapsed after a stroke. My mother suffered from multiple sclerosis, bedridden for years. A little girl grew up in fear, instability, and a home overshadowed by darkness. At 18, in 1962, I left my small village for London, holding onto a vague dream that one day, I'd appear on the big screen. In 1968, at just 24, I starred alongside Steve McQueen in Bullitt. The film became a classic, but few knew I was sidelined during production. Steve was the king of cool, and I was just a pretty face beside him. The director cut most of my lines to keep the spotlight on McQueen. When I asked why, Steve coldly replied, "People come to the theater for me, not for you." That was the first stab of my career, reduced to a shadow in the very role that defined my youth. In 1973, I reached the peak with Day for Night by Francois Truffaut, a film that won the Oscar for Best Foreign Language Film. I thought I was finally being recognized for my talent. But that same year, behind the scenes of The Greek Tycoon, I fell into an affair with Anthony Quinn, a man 28 years older than me. He swore to protect me, to be the shoulder I needed. But just months later, in Athens, I caught him with a young woman in our hotel. When I broke down crying, he just shrugged, "This is Hollywood, baby." I was 29, and for the first time, I realized how brutally love could turn into betrayal. In 1977, The Deep premiered. My image in a white bikini diving into the blue sea caused a global stir. But instead of praise, the media labeled me a bikini girl. A major American newspaper headlined, "Jacqueline Bisset, an immortal body, a fragile career." I read that line, and it tore my heart apart. At the premiere in Los Angeles, I wore a long gown and smiled on the red carpet, but inside, I wanted to disappear. In 1981, I starred with Candice Bergen in Rich and Famous. On screen, we were soulmates. Off screen, we clashed. Once, on set in New York, Candice slammed her script down and screamed at me, "You're just a pretty face, not a real actress." The press picked it up instantly, and I carried the label of a living mannequin for the rest of the decade. I was 37, and I learned, sometimes, the ones who hurt you the most aren't men, they're fellow women in the industry. Throughout the 1980s, I turned down major roles because I refused to be Hollywood's doll. In 1984, while filming Under the Volcano in Mexico, the producers forced me to attend a private party. They threatened to cut my role if I didn't go. That night, I sat in my room, fists clenched, feeling like a prisoner in my own career. That memory still haunts me. I never married. I had fleeting romances, a businessman in London in 1988, a European director in the early 90s, but none ever lasted. In 1995, I told a journalist, I didn't stay single because I didn't know how to love, but because I loved the wrong men too many times. That's the rawest truth about my life. In 2010, past the age of 65, I received a Lifetime Achievement Award at the Chicago International Film Festival. That night, the audience gave me a standing ovation. I smiled, but inside, I remembered everything. Steve McQueen cutting my lines in 1968, Anthony Quinn betraying me in 1973, Candice Bergen humiliating me in 1981. And all the times Hollywood turned me into a joke. Today, at 81, I am silent no longer. I've spent half a century in silence, but my heart still bleeds. I'm not sharing this to complain. I'm sharing so the audience knows, even a movie star, a woman once called immortal, carries wounds that never heal. And that is why I wrote the list. The list of the 5 actors I hate the most. Who's the first name? Who turned the brightest years of my life into a nightmare? I'll tell you, one by one. The first name, Steve McQueen, the cool king and the first stab. In 1968, I was just 24, a young, naive English girl stepping into Hollywood for the first time. And then fate brought me to Bullitt. The name Steve McQueen, the king of cool, was everything the world idolized. And me? I was merely the female lead beside him. I thought, this is my life-changing opportunity. But I didn't know it would also become my first scar. I remember the first day on set in San Francisco vividly. Steve walked in, cold eyes, leather jacket, and the entire crew held their breath. I stepped forward, smiled, and said, "It's an honor to work with you." He looked at me, smirked, and said, "Just stand there and look pretty." The crew burst into laughter, and I stood frozen. The original script had many lines for the female role, moments that showed my character as the only one who truly saw Bullitt's loneliness. But once filming began, I discovered those lines had been slashed. I asked the director why. He lowered his head, avoided my gaze, and quietly said, "Steve wanted it that way. People come to see him, not you." My heart sank. There's one scene I'll never forget. I sit with Steve in the apartment, talking about the dangers of his job. I had rehearsed all week, determined to make my character more than a pretty face, to give her a soul. When the camera rolled, I began my lines. But Steve deliberately cut me off, threw off the rhythm, and ruined the take. The director yelled cut. I tried to stay composed. But Steve stared at me coldly and said, "Don't try too hard. The audience is here for me, not you." It didn't stop there. McQueen demanded a bedroom scene, something never in the script. I refused, but he looked me dead in the eye and said, "If you won't do it, I've got a list of younger girls who will. Do you want to stay in Hollywood or go back to England right now?" I had no choice. In a night shoot, he suddenly halted mid-scene, turned to the crew, and shouted, "Don't waste time, she's only useful when she's naked." Laughter erupted on set. I wanted to vanish in that moment. But I swallowed my pride and finished the film. When Bullitt premiered, it became legendary. The car chase scenes went down in history. Steve McQueen was hailed as an immortal icon. And me? The press called me Bullitt's silent lover, the pretty shadow next to the king of cool. No one knew how I cried after that premiere. No one knew how shattered I felt, realizing my career, barely begun, had been reduced to a footnote in a man's legend. For years afterward, whenever I appeared in Hollywood, the only question people asked was, "Did you really date Steve McQueen?" No one asked how I performed, how I endured. I understood then, in their eyes, I would always be just a decoration beside a male star. Steve McQueen, the very first name on the list of people I despise most. He is the symbol of hundreds of men in Hollywood, dazzling on screen, cruel behind it. He made me realize that even when I stood inside a classic film, I could still be erased like a shadow. But if McQueen took away my voice, the second man was even more ruthless, a lover I thought would be my safe haven, but who betrayed me in the years I loved most recklessly. The second name, Anthony Quinn, a giant on screen, a suffocating shadow in love. In 1973, I was 29. I had just stepped out of the spotlight of Day for Night with Francois Truffaut, thinking I was finally being recognized as a true actress. Then fate brought me to the Greek tycoon with Anthony Quinn. He was nearly 3 decades older than me, a man who had it all: 2 Oscars, global fame, and an undeniable magnetism. At first, I naively believed I had found a strong shoulder to lean on. Anthony wooed me with honeyed words, "You are the light that softens a giant like me. With me, you'll never have to be afraid." I believed him. I even dared to dream of a home, a love that would outshine the glitz of Hollywood. But that love quickly turned into a suffocating cage. Anthony controlled my every move. He didn't want me going out alone. He didn't want me speaking with male co-stars. He called at all hours, and if I didn't answer, he'd scream, "You belong to me, do you hear? You're not allowed to belong to anyone else." I slowly felt myself disappearing, no longer Jacqueline, but a shadow in the life of a towering man. And then came the stab. One night in Athens, after filming, I returned to the hotel earlier than expected. I opened the door and found Anthony wrapped around a young actress. I was paralyzed. He didn't flinch, didn't show shame. He just smirked and dropped a line like acid on my face. "This is Hollywood, baby. Don't be naive. You can leave, but no one will ever love you like I do." That night, I ran out of the hotel, collapsed on the steps, and cried until the sun came up. I had poured all my trust, all my heart into one man, only to be repaid with a betrayal so vile it stripped me bare. After the scandal, the press pounced, churning out cruel headlines: Jacqueline Bisset, the fallen mistress of Anthony Quinn. I became a punchline, a prop in his charming public image. No one cared about my pain. They only relished watching a female star fall into tragedy. Anthony Quinn, the giant on the silver screen, but in love, he was a suffocating shadow, a nightmare that shattered my faith. I despise him not only for his betrayal, but for his brazenness, turning love into a game, and my heart into something to trample. But if Anthony crushed my love, the third name was even crueler, a female colleague I once thought would be my soulmate on screen, but who stabbed me in the back right in the middle of the set. The third name, Candice Bergen, the turncoat friend, the slap on set. In 1981, I was 37, with more than a few heartbreaks behind me. I thought I was strong enough not to be caught off guard anymore. Then came Rich and Famous, a film about the complicated friendship between 2 women, Liz and Mary. I played Liz. Candice Bergen played Mary. The first time I met Candice in New York, I thought, at last, a female colleague I can lean on. Candice was beautiful, charming, intelligent, and the press called us the perfect on-screen duo. In the film, we were soulmates, and I believed we could be that off-screen too. But Hollywood was never a place where sisterhood could survive for long. During filming, Candace began stealing the spotlight. Director George Cukor, who adored her breezy, humorous persona, let the camera linger on her just a bit longer. I wasn't jealous, I just wanted my role to be respected. But Candace quickly turned every scene into a silent battle. There's one moment I'll never forget. A scene where our characters argue in a living room. I poured myself into it, speaking my lines with trembling tears. As I finished, Candace didn't follow the script. Instead, she slammed her script on the table and shouted, "Jacqueline, you're just a pretty face, not a real actress." The entire set went silent. I stood there, frozen. My face flushed with heat. I didn't know whether to cry or slap her. But Candace stood there, cold and unbothered, as if she had just stated a fact. I swallowed my tears and finished the scene. But within a day, the tabloids got hold of it. The front page of a New York gossip paper screamed, "Candace Bergen, Jacqueline Bisset is just a decorative vase." That line followed me throughout the 1980s. At press events, Candace would smile sweetly, pretending nothing had happened. But every time the camera panned across us, I remembered that invisible slap. It hurt more than any man's betrayal. Because this came from a woman, someone I thought was an ally, turning on me in front of the entire crew. Years later, when Candace found great success with Murphy Brown on television, I didn't feel envy. Just a lump in my throat. Because I knew her fame was built, in part, on stepping over others, including me. Candace Bergen, the third name on the list of people I despise the most. The woman who turned sisterhood into a joke, and my career into a punchline in the media's mouth. But if Candace humiliated me in public, the fourth name was even more terrifying. A male legend so powerful, he could crush my entire career with a single whispered thread behind the scenes. The fourth name, Robert Evans, the charming mogul, the shadow that strangled my career. If Steve McQueen stole my voice, Anthony Quinn shattered my faith in love, and Candace Bergen slapped me publicly before all of Hollywood, then Robert Evans was the one who strangled my career with a velvet-gloved iron hand. I first met Robert Evans in the late 1970s. He was Paramount's golden man, the force behind The Godfather and Love Story. When he invited me to his Beverly Hills mansion, I thought it was a huge opportunity. Evans said he wanted me to audition for a major project. I was 34, hungry for a breakthrough, so I went. But that dinner wasn't just a dinner. The moment I walked in, I was overwhelmed by the luxury, a grand foyer with antique paintings, golden champagne flutes, and Robert, in a white suit, charming smile, cigarette dangling from his lips. He raised his glass and said, "Jacqueline, you could be the queen of Hollywood. But to be queen, you need a king." Throughout the evening, he never once talked about the script or the character. He talked about me, my eyes, my shoulders, how I could blow up the box office if I just learned to behave. And then, when we were alone, he set his glass down, looked me dead in the eyes and said, "If you agree to be with me, the role is yours. If not, good luck out there." I was stunned. I stood up, trying to keep my voice steady. "I came here to work, not to be your plaything." Robert chuckled, a laugh like a blade slicing coal through skin. In Hollywood, everyone's someone's plaything. You're no exception. I walked out that night. But I didn't know the decision would send my career down a road with no return. A month later, I learned the role had gone to another actress, a lesser-known name, but more cooperative. After that, calls from Paramount stopped. One by one, major projects closed their doors to me. I heard the whispers. Evans says she's difficult. Evans says she doesn't play by the rules. And in Hollywood, when Robert Evans said something, the whole industry listened. Years later, I'd see Evans on magazine covers, shaking hands with starlets, all smiles. And I'd shudder. Because I knew behind that dazzling grin was a shadow that could smother the career of anyone who dared say no. Robert Evans, the fourth name on the list of those I despise most. He didn't just take away a role. He pushed me to the edge of Hollywood throughout the 1980s, all because I dared to keep my self-respect. But if Evans strangled my career, the final name cut even deeper. Because this last one wasn't a colleague or a mogul, but someone I admired with all my heart, only to receive the most devastating betrayal from behind. The final name, Michael Sarrazin, the soulmate who stabbed me in the back. In my life, many men came and went, cold co-stars, towering traitors, powerful moguls. But Michael Sarrazin was different. He wasn't a dazzling lover, nor a globally adored star. He was someone I trusted, my soulmate, my companion, the one person I believed would never hurt me. I met Michael in the late 1960s, when we were both newcomers in Hollywood. He had sad eyes, a quiet smile, and a sensitivity rare among men in that era. We didn't fall in love, at least not in the usual sense. But we were close in another way, sharing secrets, fears, tears no one else ever saw. I once believed he was the only one who understood that behind the glamorous curtain, I was just a lost girl. There were nights we'd sit on a hotel balcony in Rome, after shooting scenes, sipping cheap wine and talking about life. I told him I feared becoming a decorative vase in Hollywood's eyes. He held my hand and whispered, "Don't worry, Jackie. I'll never let them reduce you to that." I believed him, with all my heart. But Hollywood always finds a way to turn trust into mockery. In 1974, after wrapping the deep and suffering the humiliation of being dubbed the Bikini Girl by the press, I needed someone to stand by me. I thought Michael would be that person. But instead of defending me, he sat at a party in Beverly Hills, raised a glass, and said cruelly, "Jacqueline is beautiful, but she's not a real actress. She's just a pretty illusion on the big screen." At first, I refused to believe it. Until the next morning, when headlines splashed everywhere, "Michael Sarrazin, Jacqueline Bisset is just an illusion." I saw the words and my hands trembled so hard I spilled my coffee. The friend I had once called a soulmate, the man who whispered promises of protection, had now publicly trampled me. I called him and asked why. He was silent for a moment, then sighed, "Jackie, it was just a joke, don't take it so seriously." A joke. A single joke enough to tarnish a reputation I'd fought for years to build, enough to reopen every wound, twice as deep. I hung up, sat in the living room, and looked into the mirror. And for the first time in my life, I saw myself aging. Not because of years, but because I had lost the most precious thing, trust. Michael Sarrazin, the final name on my list. Not because he was powerful. Not because he was rich or legendary. But because he was the one man I trusted completely, and the last one to make me feel like a fool. 5 men. 5 knives. And if I speak of them today, at 81, it's not for revenge. It's so the audience knows, even a woman once called immortal can carry wounds that never truly heal. 5 names. 5 knives. A life built in the spotlight, but torn apart by the shadows of betrayal. When Jacqueline Bisset wrote that list in her private notebook, she wasn't just naming the enemies of her lifetime, she was rewriting her own history, a history written in blood and tears. First came Steve McQueen, the cool masculine icon of a generation, who turned the Bullitt set into the place where she learned her first lesson in betrayal. He didn't just steal her lines or shove her into the shadow of being a sexy doll, he planted in her the harsh truth: in Hollywood, there are no friends, only winners and losers. McQueen left the first knife, the wound of public humiliation, branding her as beautiful but empty for years to come. Next was Anthony Quinn, the Zorba the Greek legend, who once held her in nights of fiery passion, then trapped her in the chains of possessiveness. Love turned into a prison. Promises of home became threats. Just one sentence whispered at a party, "Jacqueline is just my doll," was enough to let the press drag her name through the mud. The second knife struck the heart, turning a longing for love into a nightmare. Then came Candice Bergen, the supposed soul sister in Rich and Famous, who became a rival before the camera. The fiery slap, blood on her lip, the cold sneer, "Don't cut. Let her feel what shame really is." It wasn't just a scene, it was a knife of envy, of rivalry, of the cruel truth that women in Hollywood don't always protect each other. And from then on, Jacqueline understood, sometimes, your closest girlfriends become your fiercest enemies. Then Robert Evans, the Paramount mogul who didn't need to yell, slap, or strike. Just a nod, and her dream role vanished overnight. One meeting, one rejection of a personal request, and she was erased from casting lists for years. The knife of power, it left no blood, but it cut her career off a path she could never return to. And finally, Michael Sarrazin, her co-star, her soulmate, the man who once walked red carpets with her under a shared smile of trust. But it was he, at a glittering party, who raised his glass and spoke the sentence that shattered her heart: "Jacqueline was never an actress. She just got lucky being with me." Laughter erupted. The tabloids pounced. And overnight, the celebrated star became a punchline. The final knife. The killing blow, not from an enemy, but from someone she called family. Those 5 wounds never healed. They followed Jacqueline through the years, closing off her heart, turning down marriage, refusing proposals, rejecting motherhood. People called her proud. People called her cold. But no one knew that behind those blue eyes were scars that never stopped burning. And yet, Jacqueline Bisset did not fall. She stood tall. She kept acting. She proved that a woman can endure every betrayal and still rise. And fate, at long last, gave her a gift. In 2014, at the age of 70, Jacqueline stepped onto the Golden Globe stage, her hands trembling as she accepted the award for her role in Dancing on the Edge. The entire room rose to applaud. And she cried. Not for the golden trophy, but because, after decades of being dismissed, she was finally seen. It was a sweet victory, laced with sorrow, because it had come too late. At 81, Jacqueline Bisset is no longer the white-shirt goddess of the deep, nor Truffaut's seductive muse in Day for Night. She has stepped out of the blinding lights to embrace a quiet corner in the south of France, a place she calls her true home after a lifetime adrift. She never married. Had no children. Her closest companions now are a few aging cats, some lifelong friends in France, and the memories of those dazzling and devastating years. But in that solitude, Jacqueline found what Hollywood never gave her: peace. She once said, "I used to fear silent rooms." But now, that silence is a gift. Her home rests on a hillside covered in green, overlooking the Mediterranean Sea. Each morning, Jacqueline wakes early, opens the window to breathe in the sea breeze, and makes herself a cup of black tea. On her old wooden table, there's always a stack of books, French novels, English poetry, and sometimes old film scripts. She still reads, still reflects, but rarely takes on new roles. Not because she can't, but because she refuses to re-enter the machine she once called a soul-crushing factory. Jacqueline lives quietly, but not entirely alone. She strolls the nearby village, buys flowers at the market, chats in French with familiar vendors. They don't call her movie star. They just call her Jacqueline, the English lady. And that's what makes her feel truly free. Finally, she can live like a normal person, no paparazzi, no scrutiny over every wrinkle. In the afternoons, she walks the shoreline, carrying a small notebook. She writes scattered thoughts, an old dream, a line she never got to say, a memory of the mother she lost long ago. Sometimes, she writes names, those who left her with scars. She once told a reporter, "I write to remind myself." Forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. Inside her home, the walls hold old photographs, behind-the-scenes moments with Steve McQueen, memories with Anthony Quinn, youthful snaps with Candice Bergen, even pictures of Michael Sarrazin. She never took them down. She keeps them as proof of a life fully lived, even if it was filled with pain. Jacqueline never built a family. The men who passed through her life, actors, directors, billionaires, left only scars. When friends asked, she'd offer a faint smile. Maybe I wasn't born to be a wife or a mother. Maybe I was born to be a witness. But the sadness lingers. In a rare private moment, she once admitted, "What I regret most isn't losing roles. It's losing the chance to have a small family." In recent years, Jacqueline has rarely appeared in public, but every appearance makes waves. In 2014, she stunned the world by winning a Golden Globe at 70. That moment, her trembling voice, her tears, her words, "I've waited all my life," became unforgettable. To middle-aged viewers, it felt like long overdue justice for an artist who endured so much injustice. She doesn't act much anymore, but still takes on occasional small, artistic projects. For her, acting is no longer about proving anything, it's about enjoyment. She said, "When I was young, I acted to survive. Now, I act to feel alive." Jacqueline's daily life is simple. In the evenings, she enjoys a small meal. Sometimes she cooks, sometimes she dines at a local restaurant. She loves red wine, classical music, and occasionally rewatching her old films. Once, a friend asked, "Do you ever watch The Deep?" Jacqueline smiled and replied, "No. I don't want to see that girl again, the one who was too innocent, too easily hurt." Though she lives reclusively, she remains in touch with a few European film friends. Isabel Huppert once called her the quiet elder sister, and Monica Bellucci said, "Jacqueline proves that women can be beautiful and strong at any age." Those words warmed Jacqueline's heart, even if she no longer seeks recognition. At 81, Jacqueline has everything and nothing. She has fame, awards, belated respect, but no husband, no children, no one to share dinner with. She owns a beautiful home overlooking the sea, but the long nights echo only with wind and silence. She once confessed, "Some nights, I dream of hearing someone call me Mom, just once. Then I wake up, and I'm alone again." And so, Jacqueline continues, day by day, a witness. A witness to Hollywood's golden years, and its cruelty. A witness to fiery love, and to brutal betrayal. A witness to light and shadow, to glory and scars. But if you think she was broken, you're wrong. Jacqueline Bisset is still a fire that hasn't gone out. She still shows up. She still smiles. And she still tells the world, I'm still here. And I survived. But what about you, the one hearing her story now? What do you think of Jacqueline Bisset? Do you believe she was right to write those 5 names? And of those 5, who do you think left the deepest wound?